So let's study about environment impact assessment. What is EIA? So whenever at any place new project or new development project is to be constructed, it will eventually have some of the impacts on the environment, maybe positive or maybe negative. So in order to assess those impacts on the environment, we go for EIA. So, as per International Association of Impact Assessment, EIA is the process of identifying, predicting, evaluating, and mitigating the biophysical, social, and other relevant effects of development proposals prior to major decisions being taken and commitments made. So, let's understand it with the help of example. So, let's consider an example of building a new highway. So in that, first the team will identify the possible impacts of the new highway. They will look at things like biophysical impacts, like how it will affect the local wildlife and natural habitats. Then it will look on to social impacts. Will it disrupt local communities or require people to relocate? Then other relevant impacts which should be taken care of, like could it cause noise pollution or affect air quality or soil quality or other parameters of environment. Then second step, prediction. Next, they will predict the extent of these impacts. For example, the highway might cut through a forest, affecting the animal migration patterns. It could lead to the displacement of several households. Increased traffic might lead to higher levels of noise and air pollution in the nearby areas. Then next step would be evaluating. They will evaluate how significant these impacts are. They will ask questions like how many animal species will be affected and to what extent, how many people will need to be relocated and what is the impact on their lives, how much will air quality deteriorate and what will be the health implications of the same. Then the final step would be mitigation. They will find ways to mitigate these impacts. For example, they might create wildlife corridors to help animals cross the highway safely. They could provide compensation and assistance to people who need to move. They could implement noise barriers and enforce stricter emission standards for the vehicles. Like by going through these steps, the EIA process ensures that the highway project considers and addresses its potential environmental and social impacts before construction begins. So this is the example like how you can conduct EIA for any of the project. In layman language, you can say that EIA, it is the process through which environment impact of the project or the proposed development is evaluated. Evolution of EIA. So as science and technology advanced, new projects designed to benefit people started to show negative impacts on the environment. So this made it clear that we need to consider alternatives to avoid harming environment. To address these issues, various laws were introduced to minimize the negative impacts on the environment, emphasizing the need for EIA, Environment Impact Assessment. Then EIA became a mandatory regulatory process in early 1970s with the introduction of National Environmental Policy Act of 1969 in the United States. Evolution of EIA in India. EIA in India started in 1976 to 77 when the Planning Commission asked the Department of Science and Technology to evaluate river valley projects for their environmental impacts. The Government of India passed the Environment Protection Act on 23rd May 1986. One of the key decisions under this act was to make EIA a legal requirement. On 27 January 1994, the Union Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change issued an EIA notification under the Environment Protection Act. This notification made it mandatory to get environmental clearance before expanding, modernizing or starting new projects listed in Schedule 1 of the notification. The MOEFCC introduced new EIA regulations in 2006 and a draft version in 2020. These regulations outline the process and requirements which is required for conducting EIA in India. EIA legislations in India. On January 27, 1994, India's Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change made it mandatory to get environmental clearance for starting new projects or expanding the existing ones. So this rule is part of the Environmental Protection Act of 1986. Since then, the EIA notification of 1994 has been amended 12 times. In September 2006, the ministry introduced a new EIA legislation. Then in 2020 also ministry introduced the new EIA legislation. Now what are the salient features of EIA? EIA process looks at a proposed project to find out its possible positive and negative impacts on the environment. It checks both the short-term and long-term impacts of the proposed project. The EIA includes a plan that, when followed, will reduce the project's negative impacts on the environment as much as possible. In order to minimize the negative impacts, the project might use different approaches, make changes to its design, apply environmental protection measures. Now, these steps help reduce the number or severity of negative impacts of the projects on the environment. In order to check how well the plan is working and how effective the environmental protection measures are, the EIA includes a monitoring program. So let's have a look at some of the important terminologies which would be required to understand the entire EIA process. So first is baseline data. So this is the information that shows what the environment is like before any project starts. It includes data about the air, water, land, plants, animals, and the people living in the area where the project will take place. So from the definition you can see data depicting the pre-project environmental scenario. Second is appraisal. Now, this is the careful review of the application for a project. It involves checking all the required forms, the final environmental impact assessment report, and results of the public consultations. Now, this review is done by an appraisal committee to decide if the project can get the necessary environmental clearance or not. Now, what is this environment clearance? So, it is a process where a project needs to get approval from the government before it can start. It applies to new projects as well as changes to the existing projects to ensure that they meet environmental regulations. Then there are certain appraisal committees at the central level, state level, UT level, and district level. So at the central level, there is EAC, Export Appraisal Committee. It is a committee of experts constituted at central level by Ministry for appraisal of projects, refer to it and for making appropriate recommendations. Likewise, at state level EAC will be there, and at union territory level EAC will be there for appraisal purposes. Next is categorization of projects, like how projects are categorized, on what basis they are termed as category A projects, category B projects. So all the projects and activities, they are broadly categorized into two categories, like category A and B, based on the spatial extent of potential impacts and potential impacts on human health and natural and man-made resources. Like the category A projects, they have large potential impact. They can affect large areas and significantly impact human health as well as natural and man-made resources. Due to the size and nature of their impact, they require a detailed EIA. Whereas category B projects, they have a smaller potential impact. They affect smaller areas and have less significant impacts on human health and resources. They might still need an EIA, but it is usually less detailed as compared to that of category A projects. In summary, you can say that category A projects are bigger and they can cause more significant changes, while category B projects are smaller and less impactful. And all the projects or activities which are included as category A, they shall require prior environmental clearance from the central government in the Ministry of Environment and Forests on the recommendations of EAC, Expert Appraisal Committee. Whereas in case of category B projects, all the projects or activities included in this category will require prior EC from state or union territory environment impact assessment authority. So the clearance in case of category A projects, it will be granted from MOEF, now MOEFCC, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, on the recommendations of EAC, whereas in case of category B projects, SEIAA will give the environmental clearance. So this is the flow chart of EIA process. So first we'll understand a little bit from the flow chart. After that we will go into detailed understanding of all the individual stages. So this flow chart, it represents the EIA process. So here is step-by-step explanation. So first is your proposal identification. This is the starting point where a new project or proposal is identified. That is, this project is supposed to be set up at a particular place. Then second is screening. Now the proposal undergoes an initial screening to determine if an EIA is required or not required. If EIA is not required, the process can end here. If EIA is required, the process then continues. Then initial environment examination. If screening indicates the need for further assessment, an initial environmental examination is conducted. Then is scoping. Now this step involves determining the scope and major issues of the EIA. It defines the extent of the study and identifies the significant issues which are to be considered. Public involvement typically occurs at this stage, means at the scoping stage, to gather input and concerns from the public. Then is your impact analysis. Detailed analysis of the potential environmental impacts of the projects is carried out. Then mitigation and impact management. Now various measures which will be taken in order to mitigate the negative impacts and manage the environmental effects are developed. Then is your EIA report. An EIA report is prepared summarizing the findings, proposed mitigation measures and the management plans. Coming to review, now EIA report is reviewed by the relevant authorities and stakeholders. Public involvement can occur again at this stage for additional input. So you can see public involvement occurs at two stages, review and the scoping stage. Then Then is your decision making. Now, based on the review, a decision is made. If the proposal is not approved, the project may need to be redesigned and resubmitted, potentially undergoing another review. If proposal is approved, it moves to the next stage, that is implementation and follow-up. Now the project is implemented with the proposed mitigation and management measures. There is also a follow-up to ensure compliance and assess the effectiveness of the measures. Then information from this process contributes to the effective future EIA. Means whatever information will be gathered during this process, it is used to improve the future EIA process. One thing more, public involvement, it is crucial at multiple points in EIA process to ensure transparency, gather diverse inputs and address public concerns.